I'm going to take some time now to introduce the next panel who will be joining. I will be the moderator for the conversation. And I have two panelists, and I'll take a moment to introduce them. First, I'd like to introduce Suparna Diwakar. Suparna is first and foremost an educator and has worked extensively in the development sector in India for over 30 years. Her work has been at different scales, ranging from grassroots work to being part of policy-making bodies to even co-founding the Indian School of Development Management. Her contribution to the education system includes pioneering ideas of education leadership and how these could be infused in programs, for example, in Karnataka as well. She's also been part of the National Resource Group for School Leadership at the National Institute for Education Planning and Administration, as well as a member of the Mission Group for Teacher Education in the Karnataka Knowledge Commission. She's also participated in planning of the restructuring of teacher support system in Maharashtra. And most recently, she is also serving as a member of the task force set up by the government for the implementation of the national education policy right here in Karnataka. She also holds the position of Director, Center for Regenerative Development at Rashram School of Public Leadership, which I'm hoping we'd get to hear a lot about in our conversation as well, where she's designed and run courses on regenerative leadership and facilitating organizations to embed some of these practices, some of these principles in their own design and practice. She's been exploring this idea of regeneration for thriving and flourishing of all life on Earth, and the contributions that the Indic knowledge systems can make to universal well-being. Welcome to the panel, Suparna, and we're super excited to hear about your varied experiences.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and inviting me to this very, very inspirational conversation. I've been listening to it almost from the beginning, and we've had some amazing speakers. I'm looking forward to this conversation with Ben and you as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for also introducing our second panel. I will take a moment to introduce our second panelist as well. We have Benjamin Shuldiner on the panel with us as well. Benjamin is the Lansing School District Superintendent, and although he's the superintendent of that district, he consults all around the world supporting schools and districts to better serve students and their communities. Among his many endeavors, Ben also works with Norwegian school and district administrators in supporting their leadership growth. He also works closely with numerous Indian education systems to effectively provide a world-class learning environment. Locally, Ben helps support urban assembly schools as well as other DOE schools in schools and districts in New York. Before these roles, Ben was also the founder and principal of the High School for Public Service in Brooklyn, New York. And under Ben's leadership, the school received numerous awards for its outstanding success, including being named one of the top 50 high schools in New York City by the Daily News, and received a bronze medal from US News and World Report, putting it among the top schools in the country. So very much looking forward to your experiences of how you headed the school and now how you are helping other leaders in developing their schools as well. Ben also led innovative projects in this school that I'm sure we'll hear a lot about, which include, and I'm going to give a sneak peek, include a fully functioning organic farm to a school-wide grading curriculum focused on mastery and proficiency. Ben has also been awarded the prestigious Jefferson Award for Public Services. He's graduated from Harvard and also received a master's in education from Baruch College. Really glad to have you on the panel, Benjamin, and I'm really looking forward to how our experiences across two countries can feed into each other and help us reflect on our context in a different perspective. Welcome, Benjamin.
Absolutely. No, I'm very happy to be here, and it's really wonderful to be part of this conversation. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm going to kickstart our conversation we've been hearing a lot of perspectives on leadership, a lot of ideas on how different people are imagining leadership. I'd like to start with a story, or rather start by hearing stories from you. Leadership is a very slippery topic by nature. And so what I would like you to start is maybe share a story of a story that you hold very close to your heart when you think about leadership, and we'll take it forward from there. Ben, why don't you start?
I get to go first. I think that we've done a lot of research and education about how important teachers are. We know that a teacher in the classroom can really move mountains, but it's harder to kind of show what leadership is doing because, you're a principal, you're a superintendent, you're a director, whatever the title is of somebody running a school or a school district. The idea that that person greatly affects everybody, we know it in our heart, but how do you prove it? And so I love the idea of giving a narrative, giving a story. And in fact, I'll use one from India, right? And so as I've done a lot of work there. That's why I'm here. I love it there. And I see Santosh and Khushbu. It's great to see your names. I hope that you guys are doing well. I was asked once to talk to like a superintendent in an area in India. They had about 10 or 15 schools. And what you learned was that the teacher had to go and get food for the school. And you say, okay, fine, there's one teacher, that's their job. But it was taking 2 hours for that teacher to get the food, to go to the market, bring it to the cook. It was taking all this time. And so a superintendent says, wait a second, why can't we just have one person buy food for 10 schools, drop it off at each of the schools? You now save 2 hours of a teacher's time times 10. That's 20 hours a day of instructional time, 20 hours a day of a teacher working. Now, can you do research on that? Maybe, I don't know. But you know that leadership, that decision to say, I'm going to spend a little bit of time finding somebody to just deliver food rather than each of these teachers having to go out to get to the market. That's the kind of story that leadership shows. And it then, of course, says, now the teacher can be in the classroom more, or the teacher is less tired, so they can be more focused, or all of those kinds of things. So that story, I think, is emblematic of how something like leadership can change 10 schools, 20 schools so quickly.
That's a brilliant story. Thanks for sharing that. And taking that a step further, if this story was also shared with other leaders, other districts, I'm sure it can, like you said, move mountains as well for the teachers and students. Thank you for sharing that story, Ben. Suparna, we're looking forward to a story from you as well.
Oh, I have so many stories. Yeah. And like Ben said, the fact that you just can't measure the kinds of things that leadership actually achieves, right? In schools, for children, for teachers, kind of makes it invisible, right? And yet, if you look closely, there are so many stories, and a lot of my work has been in Karnataka. And so I have many stories, but I'm going to tell you one. So there was a school in Chitradurga district, which basically had two parts, right? The primary school was on one side of the highway, and the upper primary school was on the other side of the highway. And while there was land right next to the lower primary school, which could have housed the higher primary school, nobody had made the effort to put the two schools together in one place. And, somebody, a leader from the district, an education leader, went to the person who owned this land next to the lower primary school and said, you know what, we have this very dangerous situation where the kids are crossing the highway. Can you give us part of your land to build the upper primary school? And it's unbelievable because this gentleman said, you know what, in the 40 years that the schools have been across the road, nobody came and asked me to give the land for the school. And you believe me or not, this person donated the land to the school, and the higher primary school came up next to the lower primary school, creating, the school environment becomes so different. And what the community feels about sending their children to school, it was just amazing. But where are you going to, talk about this as being leadership?
Yeah, strongly resonate with that. In fact, I think you're both talking about, in both of your stories, I noticed something which was about leaders taking this effort to actually understand what's happening, identify problems, even if nobody's articulated them, because maybe in the situation of these high schools being different, could a problem had the problem been articulated in a certain manner? But that's one, identifying what's happening, where are the opportunities for change. And I think the second thing that you said is in 40 years, nobody had taken that simple effort of just asking that question. And I think that's another key part of just taking that effort, which sometimes may look like a small step, but it becomes a very big step. This reminds me also of a story that one of the schools that we work with, a fantastic exemplar school leader. And one of the things that he used to do is early morning when the students would come in from their homes, he would stand at the gate and he would greet students as they come into the school. And this is it's on the face of it, it may look like a small practice, but that made a big difference to the overall school culture and the way that teachers or parents or students interacted with each other. And I think going back to what Suparna and you, Ben, said, now how do we bring this aspect out in research, or how do we make this connection between these practices that these leaders were playing, not necessarily just the school leaders, but rather leadership practices, these things that they were doing and how they ultimately impacted the child's development. And I'm going beyond reading, writing, learning, but overall development of the child is a little difficult to see or show. So what has been your experience of seeing the role that leadership plays on overall student development? Suparna, we'll begin with you this time.
Yeah, so, I just want to sort of reflect a little bit on what we think about as leadership in the first place. And I feel in, both the stories, the one that Benjamin shared with us and the stories that you and I shared, I think there is a strong sense of purpose that all the concerned individuals had. There is a deep connect, sense of caring, love that is anchoring, the actions that these people take. And I think that sense of purpose to be able to bring about change for the better from the point of view of making sure that you're creating the environment for learning, not just for the children, but for teachers as well. And how do you really create that kind of a space, right? And I think so, for me, leadership, is about this strong sense of purpose, being anchored in that purpose. And also that what is it an individual is able to do in terms of bringing change, in terms of bringing transformation, right? And all these stories are really about that. How are you shifting something from the current situation, right? And what does that mean in terms of leadership? How do you really create the environment for thriving and for flourishing of, everybody in that system? And so, the conversations that were happening earlier, what Shibulalji shared, and even what the earlier panelists were sharing, was really about life, right? As a school system is a living system. And so you can see everybody is really coming from a space of that, strong sense of caring, of love, of a sense of purpose for everybody involved, right? Whereas a lot of the leadership conversations happen from a very mechanistic kind of metaphor, right? So that's the way I would see leadership, as being part of being anchored in purpose and looking at transformation, very living and alive kind of space.
Yeah, no, I agree, of course. I mean, this is the nice thing when you're on a panel with people that really understand this stuff. I can just say ditto and call it a day. But, I think something to think about is, the difference between leadership and management.
Yes.
So a person who is in charge of a school or a district has to be a good manager. They have to make sure that the trains run on time, that the kids get fed, that the curriculum is there. But that leader, that person that's really going above and beyond, that's the person that's making it so that the environment is so good that everybody can do their job. And that you're also creating a vision and a mission, that you're bringing people together to kind of do even better than they already do. And, I think we talk about research, of course. I was a professor before I was a superintendent. And, you want to say, well, what's the secret sauce? What's the answer? Let's just do that, right? And I think that one of the things that we do know that there is a secret sauce is relationships. Is that creating a place where the folks, whoever they are, the students, the teachers, the parents, the community, feel loved, feel respected, feel like they're part of something, that's really powerful. And what's interesting is in the last maybe 15, 20 years, we are starting to find ways to show that, to do that research. It's survey data. Now, survey data can sometimes be imprecise, but if you start to ask all of your parents, all of your students, all of your staff, how do they feel at the school? Do they feel respected? Do they feel trusted? Do they feel safe? And then that leader says, you know what my job is? It's to make sure that everybody feels good about coming to school every day. Then you will see all of these other things, right? There's been a lot of research that shows if a child has at least one adult in the school that they feel that they can trust, or that they feel kind of warm and friendly with, that actually will mean so much more than the right textbook or the right curriculum, right? There's an old line, it's people, not programs, right? It doesn't matter what the textbook is if the teacher doesn't care about the kid. And it certainly doesn't matter what the textbook is if the kid doesn't show up because he doesn't want to go to school. And so creating those places of warmth and understanding and inclusiveness, that's where a leader really can shine and can create that. Because I will say, and this is where leadership gets tough, in my own experience, I have seen really good schools with bad leaders. They just kind of stay out of the way. But I've never seen a bad school with a good leader. And so the good leader is able to make a big difference. Sometimes bad leaders win because the staff is so good, or because the community is so good, right? And especially in India, just like in America, we have certain schools that you have to take a test to get into. Well, when 0.1% of your kid gets in there and they are the top, let's be honest, my cell phone could be the teacher, right? Because those kids are just doing their thing. And so that might not be about good leadership or bad leadership. But when you look at it, what do we need to do as leaders, and what do we need to do just as educators, is to create the place where people and kids are able to do the work. And that's why that story about just greeting somebody at the door, you can translate that into data, and you can translate that into research by saying, does that create a place where people feel warm and friendly and connected? And then you can look at survey data, and I would not be surprised if that school where that headmaster or principal or whatever greeted everybody every day had a better rating when it came to how do kids feel coming to school every day, and that then can translate to success in academics.
Thanks, Benjamin. And I think that takes me to a new direction as well. You've talked about a possible way in which we could connect this to how students feel, not just students. And I think that's, again, something that's coming out through this conversation, that the impact that leadership has is not only at the student level, but also at the teacher level and overall school culture level. And I think you began to talk about how we could possibly begin to make this a little bit more explicit. Tacitly, we all feel it. Tacitly, we can all sense it. I think both of you talked about that as well. But how do we make it a little bit more explicit so that we can begin to learn a little bit about it? And that's been a very sticky area for research, I think. What has been your experience with how research has tackled this problem, and the gaps that research have currently in showing this linkage between leadership and overall student development?
Yeah, it's hard, right? It's hard to prove. I mean, there's a couple of people in America that have tried. Bob Marzano has done a meta-analysis on like hundreds of different research on leadership, and he has 21 different leadership like traits and kind of can rate the effectiveness of each of them. But for me, I think the issue is, let's just look at outcomes. In education, far too often we spend time looking at inputs. How many hours did you teach? How many hours did the kid come to school? How many, did you teach it? Were they there? Who cares? If they didn't learn anything, then it doesn't matter, right? And so we need to just kind of think about those outputs and then see if there's connection. So, if a kid feels comfortable in a school? Is the attendance going up? Is the test scores going up? Are they graduating more? Those kinds of things. So rather than say, well, I taught it, I don't know if they learned it, to really look at, are they learning it and using it? Now, in India, you definitely have state exams, national exams that help to kind of certify that. But, we also know that exams are just one piece of the puzzle. Getting a good score on one exam, that might be that you weren't sick that day. It doesn't necessarily show true learning and true understanding. So, I just think that what we need to do when we're looking at research and when we're looking at what to do is, we know the high quality teacher in the classroom can move a kid. Well, then what are you doing as a leader to get that high quality teacher in that room to move the kid? We know that if a kid has a relationship in a school with at least one adult, they'll do better. So what are you doing to get that relationship to happen, right? So we know that there are pieces that work. And we know that if a student is engaged, if a student wants to be there, they're more willing to do it. If they're not hungry, if they have glasses, all sorts of things like that. And then you just kind of look at the outcomes. Are the kids getting better test scores? Are they coming to school? That kind of stuff. And it's really just up to the leader to have that true vision. What I find works, and this is in Norway, in Bangalore, in Lansing, in New York, it doesn't matter where, is just be clear about what the outcomes are that you want. So for instance, I became the superintendent here. So that means I run the school district for the whole city. We have 26 schools, 10,000 kids. I know that's very small for India, but it's big here. And what we did, even before I officially became the superintendent, I said, what are our goals? And they said, I don't know. I said, what do you mean? What are our goals? What are our stated goals? And in one day, we took all the leaders and we said, let's create goals. And the goals now, and they're published, they're on our website, 85% high school graduation, 90% daily attendance, and 11,500 student enrollment. Because here in Michigan, you can kind of choose what district you go to. So if more kids are choosing your district, it's pretty clear that kids want to come here, parents want to come here. And just by naming those goals, as a leader, we're now holding people accountable to that. And that allows a good teacher to know what they're focusing on. It allows a good principal to know what they're focusing on, a good director. And that's what we need to do is stipulate what are our goals and then get people there. And we know how to get to those things. But if we as leaders don't name them, we're not transparent about them, then all the world's ills will get in the way and we'll never get there.
I think that's a brilliant point. I'm also connecting it back to Suparna. You talked about purpose, a strong sense of purpose that roots then everything else that we do. And I'm connecting it to what Ben is saying, is that strong sense of purpose has to be shared across this living school system. And how can we think about creating that shared strong sense of purpose? Thanks, Benjamin. Suparna, anything to add in terms of how might we make these connections, or how have we been making these connections in research and potential gaps or challenges in making this explicit?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the work depends on the questions we are asking. And I think what Benjamin is saying, right? For example, it's only recently that people have been asking this question about how do children feel in schools, right? It's not a question that normally people would ask about feeling, right? And I think those questions are beginning to be asked. There have been studies around sense of inclusion of people from poorer socioeconomic and deprived sections of society. How included do they feel? Tribal children, how do they feel in classrooms? But also about teachers and how they feel. In terms of their working conditions, in terms of, are they feeling that the school culture or the school system's culture itself, is it enabling, is it facilitating, is it, supportive or empowering? I think those kinds of things are beginning to be asked. And so we have actually, if you look at the work that's been done with respect to restructuring of school support systems, right? A lot of these questions were asked. at the time when the 12th five-year plan was done, and when the National Curriculum Framework for Teacher Education came out. So these questions are being asked. And I think, there is the issue of what is considered as rigorous research in such a space versus what is useful, for you to shift things, to make change, to transform. And I think both are required. I'm not saying it's not required, but I think a lot of this is inquiry that teachers, school leaders, education leaders across the system should be asking as reflective practitioners, right? As a practitioner, how am I reflecting on what's going on? What are the things that, even if I'm not a rigorous researcher, right, it's an inquiry mindset, a reflective mindset, which is going to help me to move the system towards the goals, as Ben was outlining. Yeah. I think
one thing I want to add. So the practitioner research is a really important piece, and again, as a professor, as these eggheads that I ascribe to be, sometimes we talk about, and I love what you were saying, the kind of what is rigorous research versus other research. The truth is they're both good, and that we don't want to discount the voice of the teacher or the voice of the principal. And so there's actually a Professor Susan Lytle, who comes out of the University of Pennsylvania, and she was the godmother of practitioner research. And what she said, she was one of the first people, this is a PhD, fancy professor, brilliant person at an Ivy League school. She said, there's nothing wrong with studying your own students. There's nothing wrong with just sitting there and saying, well, who learned today? Oh, well, this didn't work. Let me try to change it. And the research that was coming out of classrooms was actually more useful than some, large case study that somebody was doing with 37 different researchers. And so, all of the people listening, I just hope that you feel empowered to look at your own world, see what's working, and see how you can either make things better and try different things, or then if things are really working, spread the word. Say, hey, look, it worked in my class or it worked at my school. Maybe it'll work somewhere else too.
That's an amazing point. I hadn't thought about this particular aspect when we began the discussion, but I love how you're connecting it back to just being reflective and sharing that reflection as well, both as equally critical as an important piece of how we think about leadership and research in leadership. I think, Suparna, you mentioned that these questions are beginning to get asked now, and these things are beginning to get talked about now. The criticality that leadership plays, how might we develop school leaders? One of the questions that's coming up on the chat is that some of the things that we're talking about require a lot of motivation for leaders to have, that strong sense of purpose and motivation for them to have. There are two related questions. I'm going to club them together and would leave it to you to answer them. One is, would you equate a struggling leader or a leader who's not performing maybe particularly well as a demotivated leader? Are we seeing a connection between these two? And second related question is, what have been your experiences in actually motivating these leaders or creating that or generating that inspiration and helping them connect to their cause? If you have any stories or experiences to share with us. Suparna, you're on mute.
I don't know if there is a demotivated leader, all right, unless you're talking about a position, right, that somebody is, a leader and it's in a position, and therefore, you probably say they are demotivated, because the way we looked at leadership is to say purpose, transformation, change, action for that means there's a motivation, right? And so I don't know about demotivated leader, right? But I feel that the way that a lot of the work we do with teachers, with education leaders across across the hierarchy in our complex education system is really looking at people like minor technicians. This is a term that Israel Scheffler used, that, our teachers are minor technicians. And there is, if the system is like a machine, you have to follow, a handbook, and everything will, be done as per the handbook. Now, this is, in my mind, some of these things might be important from a management perspective, right? You need to have certain systems and processes running smoothly to be able to, shift things as well. But if you're trying to say, something needs to be transformed, right? And you're expecting these leaders to be the people who are bringing about that transformation, we have to stop thinking about these people as technicians and really start looking at what is it that will drive this kind of a sense of purpose. What is it that will enable people to reach into themselves, right? The inside out kind of leadership that is required to be able to say, if I have to serve this purpose, right, what is it that I need to do? How am I building my capacity, my capability, while also enabling that for others around me? So it's partly what I was saying earlier, how do I create that environment which enables thriving and flourishing for myself and for others, right? And so that's the, sort of regenerative leadership work that's begun to happen across the world, where you're really saying, what is the human purpose? What's the essence of this individual? What is their sense of service to people around, to the community, to these children, right? And so if we started, I think, building our, stop calling them training, but really look at this whole process as development and evolutionary, the way that we would design things would shift substantially. I feel a lot of these issues are anchored in mental models that are informing design. And I think that shift in mental models is going to be critical, and NEP is actually leading us in that direction.
Yeah. So, of course, again, I agree. And I think I do want to be clear, though, sometimes is, yes, some leaders get burnt out and some leaders need to be kind of reinvigorated, especially with COVID and just the stress of the world and the war in Ukraine. I mean, there are some amazing leaders who are just so burnt out. And one of the ways that you can motivate them is by giving them support, by telling them it's okay to take a breather, and maybe they just need some clerical support, or maybe they just need to refocus their time, or just take a break. I mean, today's the last day for us for a week and a half. We have spring break starting tomorrow, and I told my executive team, I said, look, please take a couple of days, just breathe, right? I mean, it's still cold here, but I'd say go swimming, but just take a walk, right? Just relax. But I also want to be clear that there are just bad leaders, right? There are just people that should be fired. And, sometimes we don't like saying that in education, but, I'm from New York, so we don't care, right? It's sometimes you just got to say, you're not very good. And a lot of times, especially in education, we're too nice. We don't actually say, we just kind of move them around, or we say, oh, don't worry about it. And, you can try to be better. And I think, again, when you look at leadership, there are competencies. Are they emotionally intelligent? It's really hard to teach that to adults, right? I mean, are they organized? Do they actually care about kids? Do they put kids first and not themselves? I mean, look, I am in education because I believe people can learn, but I'll tell you, when somebody's 50 years old, you're probably not going to change the way they react to things. I mean, they can, but who they are is who they are. I mean, you can learn ideas, you can learn things, but behavioral change is really hard. I don't know if I, as a person in my mid 40s, am I going to change who I am in my core? Probably not. I mean, I don't think so. But I can learn skills. And I think we spend too much time saying, oh, this leader, it'll get better. I'll tell you, I've had thousands of people work for me. Almost every time I said, let's just give this person a benefit of the chance, we still had to fire them. I mean, we really did. And I know that might sound harsh, but like, if you've been a principal for 10 years and things aren't getting better, is it really about professional development? Like, I don't know. And I just think that, and if it is, look, I always have an open mind, open-minded, but be honest, because here's the thing about school, you got to put kids first. I can't tell you how often I say in my office here, we are not a jobs program. We're not here to give adults jobs. We're here to support children. And if we always make that child first, then the decisions we're going to make are there. So yes, is it sometimes a bad leader is just unmotivated or stressed or whatever? Yes. But sometimes a bad leader is just a bad leader. And you got to be honest about that.
Yeah. So I said about the position, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
I take great umbrage at your saying people don't change. I'm 56.
But you know that your soul, the person that you are, the way that you handle things, like you're learning, you're becoming a better person every day, I hope. But like when somebody's been in leadership for 10 years and they're doing it a certain way, changing that behavior takes a long time, if it's even possible. And I don't want to waste the 2 years on the kids,
Yeah. No, I said about position, right?
Totally.
Yeah. It's a positional thing. Then you are a bad leader in that position.
That's right. And we just did that here, right? We had somebody that was a principal of a school, not a good fit. We put her in a different position. It was the perfect fit, and she's doing exceptionally well. But I'll also tell you, we had somebody that was the head of our special ed program, and she was just not good. And so she's gone, right? There is no good place for her. It's to be retired, So.
But I also want to just add, Ben, that recently there's been a study done by the Wellbeing Project, the WISE Network, on teacher burnout.
Yeah.
Right? And what does it mean for leaders and teachers in the education space in terms of well-being? And I agree completely with you about, the circumstances can lead to, burnout. And the most motivated person could, get demotivated. But I think I was just talking about a generic context. But I would want, I think everybody who's listening should take a look at this research that's been done on well-being of teachers. And I think it has a lot of relevance. We should do a study like that in India as well.
Yeah. I mean, we are doing a lot of it in America, and it is just overwhelming. It is the burnout is overwhelming, especially these last 2 years. And what's interesting is MetLife, the large insurance company, since the 40s has been doing research on staff happiness, and always number one, it's not salary, it's not healthcare, it's do I feel valued? Do I feel supported? And this burnout now, people are like not feeling that. And so you're 100% right. I mean, and so I would just say to any leaders on this call, just take the human of the people that work for you to heart too. How are they feeling? Because that's going to change the way that they act as a teacher, as a principal, as a parent, anything.
Yeah, that's again a wonderful point, and I'm relating it back to so our teams visit schools, our teams talk to teachers, talk to leaders, and almost always one of the things that comes back in their reflections is that when we ask them, we're often the first person in years who've asked them how they're doing and what their challenges are. And a lot of times team members just say, you know what, they just needed a space to talk, and they just needed a space to feel heard. And immediately that's something that I was relating back to what you were saying. We're also running short of time, so I'm going to move forward to something that you kind of touched upon, I think both of you in your debate on, can we change once we've reached a certain stage in our lives? I think especially, I don't know how it is in US, and maybe you can spread some light on that. But in India especially, a lot of times leaders rise to a certain position based on their seniority or based on their experiences. So by the time they've reached a school leader position or something more than that, they have spent over 2 decades or 3 decades doing work in a certain way. And then when we talk about leadership development and moving on to what you were saying, Suparna, evolving their idea of leadership, what has been your experience of that? What has been your experience of enabling leadership or developing leadership? Maybe keeping Ben your comment on how maybe some people are just not a good fit, but for those who maybe can learn some skills, do need some support. What has been your experience on developing leadership in your context?
Is that question for me, Rucha?
I think both of you would love to hear from both of you, Suparna, especially if you could also add from the perspective of NEP policies as well and your experience in working with the government as well.
Yeah. So maybe I can go first then.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I think, like I was saying, right, a lot of the work that we do with leadership has been training, right? My experience has been that if you're able to engage with leaders, right, and I've worked with school leaders, cluster resource persons, block resource persons, diet faculty, DEOs, everybody. My sense is that, there will be a small proportion of people who will fall in the category that Ben is talking about, who would find it difficult to, sort of shift. But I think the way that we design these learning and development processes, right, is going to be the game changer. I feel that rather than talking down to them, which is what many training programs do, we need spaces for collaboration, co-creation, co-design, conversation, which brings into the room the experience and the lived realities of these leaders, but also to give them a sense of the possibilities of what the future can actually enable, or the future that they can enable happen, right? And I think just not having a vision, right, is many times a big problem. The goals that Ben was talking about, right? Yeah. A lot of our leaders, actually, they are administrators, right? And so that makes it a big problem because on the one hand, we are expecting them to do something else, but the way the system is designed is for them to respond in particular ways, right? So there is a sort of compliance-driven command control mechanistic system that we have set up, but we want them to behave very differently. And these two don't meet, right? So my experience has been that if you actually create a framework, right, within which leaders are empowered to exercise agency, principles that they adhere to, but are not told what to do, exactly what to do, rather they are creating it in their context, right? And are given the opportunity to reflect on that action, whether it is through peer experiences being shared, whether it is collaborative action that is reflected upon, and there is a facilitated process of making explicit the learning that's emerging from this experience, right? Yes. The kind of engagement, the kind of exploration, the kind of risk-taking that leaders are able to do is mind-boggling, right?
I agree.
I've seen it. It's just amazing what people can do.
Yeah, especially,
we haven't tapped that power. We haven't tapped that, we just need to unleash that. And I think just coming to NEP, Ben, before I hand over to you.
Oh, sure.
National education policy is actually talking about autonomy, about school complexes, creating spaces for contextualization, for decentralization, devolution of power, right? And so we are living in amazing times in India right now, right?
That's great.
This is really the time for leadership to step up and grab the opportunity that the policies, sort of created.
Yeah.
And I think just embedding it in some of these principles is going to be very critical.
Right. Well, and that's what has been proven to work, right? Is you have a vision and a mission that everybody agrees to, and then you empower your people to do it. Like, that's it. And then it's about holding people accountable. We don't do a very good job with that. It's also about making sure that people are supported so that they know what it is, and spending really, really a lot of time to understand what the goal is so that they can move towards it. And, you talked about co-construction. I mean, I'm a Paulo Freirean, like the rest of us, you're right, is we believe in co-construction of meaning and co-construction of ideas. And if you don't have buy-in to what you're doing, it doesn't work, right? So I would hope everybody reads, Pedagogy of the Oppressed and understands how we can move education forward. So I know we're running out of time. So I want to say, I agree with you 100%. I hope that the empowerment works. We've seen it in New York. That was a huge change. We took a bunch of low-performing high schools, shut them down, brought in new leaders and empowered them, but held them to a standard. And the average graduation rate of those schools went from 40% to about 70%. It flew because we empowered our leaders, but we held them accountable to certain metrics.
I wish we had time to go into more of these stories, and I love how this discussion is also rooted in your actual stories and experiences, which makes it so much easier to think about and to talk about as well. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I'm going to take a minute to maybe quickly summarize before we hand it over to the next set of discussions. A couple of things that you talked about in terms of how we imagine leadership, and I have a few key takeaways that I'd love to maybe share with the rest of the audience. One is this connection to purpose, both with yourself, but also co-creating this with others, with your team, with people that you're working with. Creating a nurturing environment, which I think Ben called the secret sauce. That's maybe one thing that we do know. The one thing that we do know does make a difference and does help. And that's a critical role that leaders are expected to play. A third part, which I think came out in our discussion, was the importance of being reflective in your practice, and maybe less of trainings or less of theories needed, but more of spaces for leaders to constantly reflect on what's working, what's not working, and then keep sharing that. And the fourth key point was also about, I think this also goes back to a lot of theories on how we're moving away from looking at problems in a mechanistic manner to looking at evolving dynamic problems. And those are the kinds of problems that leaders, not just leaders, actually all of us, actually, especially in a field like education, are dealing with. So how can we create that space for local problems and local solutions to come into the picture? And I love your point about how if we're imagining that this is leadership, then the support or development for leadership has to also stick to these principles. I remember a couple of years back, there was this it was a seminar on activity-based learning and experiential learning for teachers. They were expected to teach in an experiential manner, though their whole training day long was a seminar for the teachers, which I think is a great example of how what we expect leaders to do needs also to be reflected in how they're supported and the kind of development opportunities that they're given as well. Thank you so much, Ben and Suparna. This was lovely talking to you, especially looking at your experiences in different contexts, but also a lot of similarities I could see coming out through your conversations and experiences.
Yeah, I get, when you've been around like we have, if you kind of have paid attention, we really think so similarly, because the truth is the truth, be it in India, in New York, so it's great. And thank you so much for the time. It's great to see everybody.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you.